very small team. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what would be helpful is you sharing across, since you're out asking and getting information and meeting with fintech companies and others, it might be interesting for that information to be two-way,
Mm-hmm.
meaning share a little bit about what you've seen that's working or other institutions that have become successful as opposed to merely a listening session and a gathering of information. And even there was a hesitancy. And I think part of that is, well, I don't want to suggest something or certainly not looking for an endorsement, but that might not be fully vetted through the organization and bureaucracy of the organization. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And
Yes.
can I just...
These are not specific. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
What I was saying is these are not. This is a little. So no one said the reason why I'm not sharing more information is X, Y, or Z, but it's clear that the Office of Innovation was not set up for that purpose.
Right.
Or had the ability to pivot, to say, hey, if that's helpful, let me figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I think, don't worry, I would never say OCC or anything like that. I would just say,
Yes.
that there is a theme about innovation and involving regulators that they might not be fit for purpose. And there was one respondent who mentioned that. And, I would never say, because obviously,
Yes, no, I understand.
For confidentiality reasons in GABV, we have one bank in Japan, and obviously whatever they say could be easily identified. Yeah, so don't worry about that.
Easily attributable to that one institution.
Exactly.
I think you only have two. Let's see. I think there may be two of us who are OCC, two or three, and at least two. I know David Ryland's bank is OCC.
Yeah, but I think for this, I'll tell you. Actually, I'll ask you for some advice at the end of this interview as to next stages.
Sure.
Just on that innovation, does it happen a lot that in your bank, someone raises a hand and says that it could be uncomfortable or it could be received badly by regulators?
Yes, it did, but it's something we've been working on, and not that I've been overt about it. But I think we're hearing it less in the last several years, and it's not necessarily because of the regulator's perspective. It's really, I think some of my staff have become comfortable that that's a way of, if something is outside of their comfort zone, to invoke a higher power, so to speak. And whether intentional or not, it's just that if you think about a regulated institution, as I know you were doing a great bit of, the balance of power, particularly in smaller institutions, is such that at the end of the day, even with a wonderful regulatory relationship, you really have no power. So you don't want to find yourself in a position. That doesn't mean you can't. So where we'd like to take that conversation is, oh, maybe that's right. Well, let's explore that a little bit. How could we think about this in a context where we could have an acceptable regulatory response, or maybe we should, think of five or six different iterations and call. We have a great relationship with our team there, and maybe ask them or talk to them about what they've seen. So these are better responses. But what I'm telling you, what I'm trying to give you a sense of, is that in a room, if you invoke that, it can kind of, it can be a real downer, right? It can really in the conversation, or and particularly if it's anywhere in your regulatory risk officers, or your compliance officer, or your anyone who has authority or perceived authority in that area. Credit professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that may be, I don't think that's individualistic to my institution. I do think I think it just probably occurs at different degrees,
Mm-hmm.
even as different degrees of frequency, even as it has in my institution. It had peaked at a point, and then I kind of recognized that was happening, and then tried to shift to have more full conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I think you described that, you articulated it very well, and I think you're right. I think this will be one of the themes here in this research, because if you obviously know, like, the whole issue of innovation during the financial crisis, innovation, and here I mean securitization and mortgages, was said to be the reason why we had financial crisis. That's why you have now Basel Committee, all those big regulators imposing new, stricter regulatory constraints in terms of capital requirements and so on and so on. Yeah. But what about banks like yourself? A smaller bank, values-based, who wants to help unprivileged or less privileged communities. What about you? Your innovation for sure is different. You're not creating financial models, or even if these were financial models, your objective, is different. It's not just to make money, and so
very much so.
So I think this in my view, this requires a little bit of unpacking later on, even at the working group, because this may be very interesting. That.
Can I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry.
Let me share just two thoughts. No. You're just sparking things I wanted to share. So I think, to your point about the financial crisis, the impetus for it, and the reaction. Well, first to the results of it. So, in lesser resourced communities, the financial crisis was particularly severe. So if you look at anything from job loss, unemployment, to housing foreclosures, to small business financing, in the under-resourced communities, these were more severely hit. And so two things happen. One is that you need, in the aftermath, which is what we're talking about, so you institute new regulations to ensure that some of the same stimuli or triggers don't occur again. But you also have another problem, and that is your lower income communities are even more severely disadvantaged. And so really, on one hand, you need to be even more intentional and directed and perhaps innovative to solve those problems. On the flip side, you're going in two different directions if you follow what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
on
I
the
am.
flip side, from financial services more generally, and I don't put fault here, but this is just the way, in my experience, it occurs. When you have a crisis, even if you identify the source of the crisis or the sources, as a regulatory body or as a control body, you tighten up. And you don't tighten up just